The tea had already gone cold. I had poured it 2 hours earlier. The rim of the cup was chipped, a small flaw I never minded. It used to be George's favorite. He liked the weight of it, he said. Said it felt honest. The sunlight came through the blinds in thin golden lines. It fell across the kitchen floor like memory. The house was quiet, almost holy. I had set the table carefully, laid out the plates, filled the sugar bowl, folded the napkins the way George liked. Even if no one noticed. Even if no one ever said thank you. My knees ached, but I moved slowly, gently, like I was borrowing space. Then I heard the stairs. The heavy footfall. Leah walked in first. Her robe loose. Phone in hand. Eyes down. She did not say good morning. Then came the kids. Olivia smiled. Ben waved sleepily. That was enough to warm something in me. Just for a moment. And then, Derek. Big-shouldered. Loud in his silence. A man who entered rooms like they owed him something. He poured his coffee. Saturday down. Said nothing. I sat at the edge of the table like I always did now. Not quite part of the circle. My plate had one piece of toast. A little egg. I never took more than I needed. I looked up. Met his eyes. Morning, Derek, I said. No reply. Just the sound of chewing. Leah pretended not to hear. The children whispered about some video game. And then, his chair scraped back. You know what I'm sick of. His voice cracked the room. He stood up. Face red. You eat but don't help. He shouted it. At me. You sit there like you're the queen of this place. Like you're owed something. Well, you're not. No one spoke. Not even Leah. And then he lifted his coffee mug, still steaming, and threw it. It hit me in the lap. Hot. Sharp. Silent. I didn't scream. The mug rolled under the counter. The stain bloomed across my dress. I looked down. Hands trembling. The world didn't stop. Leah just said, Derek. Not now. That was all. I stood. Slowly. I think I'll go upstairs. No one stopped me. No one followed. And in that moment, I realized something colder than the coffee. This house was no longer mine. And maybe neither was she. When your own daughter looks away, how do you look at yourself the same again? The smell of cedar was always strongest in the morning. Especially after rain. That porch, George built it with his own hands. He said he needed to. Said peace had to be made, not bought. Every nail he hammered was a kind of prayer. I remember standing in the grass watching him work in silence. Sweat darkened the back of his shirt. He never swore, even when the boards split. Just exhaled, and started again. When he finished the porch, he turned to me and said, This is where we'll grow old, Mabel. And for a time we did. The house came next. Piece by piece. Room by room. He painted the kitchen walls sky blue. Said it matched my eyes. I laughed. Said he was being ridiculous. But secretly I liked the way he saw me. We moved in during the spring of 1959. No furniture yet, just blankets on the floor, a transistor radio, and the smell of new wood. That first night we shared beans on toast and danced to a crackling tune neither of us knew the name of. We didn't need lyrics. We had rhythm. And hope. I hung my wedding dress on the back of the bedroom door. It stayed there for years. That winter, I knitted George a scarf, gray and heavy. He wore it even when the snow had melted. Said it reminded him of home. Every Sunday, he made me tea. He never got the steeping time right. But I drank it anyway. Because love isn't perfect. It's persistent. And then came Leah. Tiny. Red-faced. Lungs strong as thunder. George held her like glass, eyes full of wonder. I built this house for her too, he whispered. She just does not know it yet. We brought her home wrapped in a thick wool blanket. She wailed until I sang. And from that day on, this kitchen, this porch, this house, it all belonged to her too. At least I thought it did. Leia's laugh used to echo through these walls, high and sweet like wind chimes after rain. She learned to walk on these floorboards, took her first steps toward the kitchen, straight into George's arms. He cried again, not loudly, just quietly into her hair. That night we carved the date into the pantry wall. It's still there, under years of paint and dust. I kept every drawing she made, even the ones just scribbles. They hung on the fridge for decades, held by little alphabet magnets. In the summer, she'd lie on the porch eating frozen grapes, legs swinging off the edge. George would sit beside her telling stories about trees that could whisper if you listened long enough. Leia believed him. I think I did too. When she got older, she'd sit on the counter and talk while I cooked. She hated math, loved rainstorms, and once told me she wanted to be a butterfly farmer. I still remember the way she smelled like clean laundry and bubble gum. She used to dance barefoot in the kitchen. On school days, on Sundays, on days she should have been too tired. And I watched. Always from the sink. Always with love too big to say out loud. She used to beg George to read her bedtime stories. He never said no. Not once. The house was never grand, but it held everything we ever needed. Warmth, noise, silence, love. The first time Leia brought Derek over, she was 19. George was already slowing down. The treatments made his hands shake. But he stood up, shook Derek's hand, tried to smile. He seems polite, he whispered to me later. But a bit cold. I told him not to worry. That maybe it was just nerves. Now I wonder if George saw something I refused to see. Back then I was just happy Leia still came home. Still ate at our table. Still asked for my cornbread. I did not notice the way Derek looked around, like the house wasn't enough. Like the walls were too close. The furniture too old. The stories too soft. That night as I folded linens, George said something I never forgot. If he ever makes her forget what this house was built from, remind her. I had nodded, not knowing how much I would cling to those words, and not knowing how much she would forget. George passed the year Leia got married. She wore ivory, not white. Said she didn't want to look like everyone else. She had her father's eyes that day. Steady, clear, quietly afraid. The wedding was small. Our backyard. The trees in full bloom. Petals fell onto the cake. George watched from a chair near the hydrangeas. His skin pale. Breath slow. He insisted on standing for the vows. Held my hand the whole time. That night when the house was quiet again, he told me I did what I could, Mabel. Now the rest is hers. I sat on the porch beside him, rocking slowly, listening to the old wind chimes whisper against the dark. The next morning, he was gone. I kept the scarf he wore that night. It still smells faintly of cedar. After the funeral, they brought papers. Derek, mostly, said it was just a formality. Said they wanted to help. I smiled. Told them I'd think about it. Then tucked the folder away into George's desk drawer. Under the old flag. Next to our wedding bands. They never asked again. But I knew what they thought. That I would forget. That I would surrender. They didn't know me. Not really. I kept the house running as best I could. Paid the bills. Replaced the shingles one winter when the wind tore them off. I planted peonies beside George's bench. And I waited. For Leia to come home. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she did not. When she called, it was brief. Soft. like guilt in a paper envelope. Then one spring she asked if I'd consider moving in. Said they had space. Said it would be easier. I hesitated. Then asked one question. Will there still be a garden? She paused. Then said, there's a small yard. But it's mostly stone now. I said I'd think about it. And I did. For weeks. Until the wind chimes broke in the middle of a storm. The sound they made was not music. It was grief. That's when I said yes. The first week in their house felt like walking on bubble wrap. Soft. Fragile. Every step made a sound someone wished I hadn't made. Derek showed me to the guest room. White walls. No curtains. A bed that still smelled like plastic. He did not offer to carry my bag. Just pointed. Said, you can settle in here. Leia hugged me too quickly. Said it'll be good, Mom. Just give it time. I tried. Every morning I woke early. Set the table. Boiled eggs. Arranged napkins like I used to. No one noticed. They rushed past me. Coffee cups in hand. Shoes squeaking on tile. Phones already in their palms. At dinner, I offered to help cook. Leia said, oh, it's okay. You just relax. Derek said nothing. So I sat. Folded my hands. And listened to the clink of forks and the silence between them. Even the kids had changed. Olivia used to braid my hair. Now she barely looked up. Ben asked me once why my suitcase still sat in the corner. I had no answer that would not make him sad. The television was always on. Some show with canned laughter. It filled the room and drowned out everything else. I began to shrink. Not physically, but in presence. Like dust on top of a shelf no one wiped. One afternoon, I cleaned the kitchen. Scrubbed every surface. Reorganized the pantry. Derek walked in. Paused. Then muttered, no one asked you to touch that. I said I just thought it might help. He opened a cupboard. Sighed. Where's the peanut butter? Second shelf right side. He slammed it shut. Found it. Did not say thank you. That night, I heard them whispering behind the door. She moves things, he said. She watches everything. She's just trying to help, Leia replied. She's adjusting. Well, I'm not, he snapped. This isn't her house. I stood in the hallway barefoot holding a folded towel. And for the first time, I didn't know where to put it. The guest room had no clock. So I used the hallway light to tell the hours. At night, when it flicked off, I knew it was past 10. When it clicked back on, Derek had left for work. I timed my mornings around that silence. Crept to the kitchen only after the door slammed. Leia stayed upstairs longer now. Said she worked remotely, but I rarely heard typing. I cleaned anyway. Dusted corners. Washed laundry that wasn't mine. Refolded towels. Picked up Olivia's socks and Ben's cereal crumbs. One morning I swept the porch. Leia opened the door surprised. Mom, you don't have to do all this. I smiled. I know. But I did it anyway. Because doing nothing made me feel invisible. Doing something made them uncomfortable. There was no in between. At dinner, Derek talked about work. His voice filled every gap. When I tried to ask about the kids' school, he raised a hand slightly, not to stop me, but to keep his story going. No one noticed. I went quiet again. That week, they bought a new dining table. Larger, modern, glass and steel. They moved the old oak one to the garage. The one George made. By hand. Every corner sanded smooth. The legs still marked with tiny initials Leia carved when she was 7. I stood by the garage that evening. Just staring at it. Covered in a dusty sheet. The smell of varnish still clinging to the wood. Ben walked up behind me. Grandma, I turned. He pointed at the table. Why is it in here? I didn't know what to say. So I knelt beside him and said, "Sometimes people forget what matters most until it's gone." He tilted his head. "Can we eat on it again someday?" I nodded, but I knew the answer. Not while I was here. Later that night, Leia knocked softly on my door. "I heard you didn't eat much." I smiled faintly. "Not very hungry." She lingered. Then said, "Please don't take Derek personally. He's stressed. Work's been hard." I nodded again. Because it was easier than asking. "And what about me?" It was Sunday morning when the real shift came. The kind of quiet morning George used to love. Sunday filtering through sheer curtains. The smell of toast and black coffee. I had woken early as always. Tiptoed to the kitchen. Set the table with care. One slice of toast for myself. No butter, no jam. Just enough. I sat in the corner watching light stretch across the floor. Leia came down first in her robe, scrolling on her phone. She barely glanced at me. "Morning," she mumbled. Then came Olivia and Ben. They smiled. Saturday down. Then Derek. 6'2", broad-shouldered, silent. He poured coffee. Saturday at the head of the table. Picked up his plate. Started eating. No words. I said, softly, "Morning, Derek." He did not answer. The silence grew thick. Sticky. Like honey left too long. Then the chair scraped. Hot. Sharp. Like a blade against Tila. "You know what?" he barked. "I'm sick of this." Everyone froze. "You eat but don't help," he growled, his face red. "You sit like you're queen of the house, but you're not. You're just a damn freeloader." Leia's head snapped up. Olivia dropped her spoon. Ben curled inward. I blinked. Opened my mouth. I try to help. I whispered. "My hip." He laughed. Dry. Cruel. "Your hip. You've been here 6 months doing nothing but taking up space. Our food. Our power. Our water." "Derek, please," Leia said. But he wasn't done. He grabbed his mug. Still steaming. And hurled it. Hot coffee splashed across my lap. Burned my skin. Soaked my nightgown. I gasped. Not from pain. But shock. The mug rolled under the counter. He slammed his plate down. It cracked. Eggs flew. "I work 50 hours a week," he roared, "and come home to this." I sat frozen. The burn pulsed. No one moved. Leia just stared at her folded hands. Derek leaned closer. "You're not my mother. And you sure as hell don't belong here." The words hit like stone. I turned to Leia. Begged her with my eyes. She said, "Only Derek, just. Not now." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. I climbed the stairs as if carrying bricks in my chest. One step. Then another. Each heavier than the last. My nightgown clung to my skin, wet with coffee stinging. At the top I looked back. Derek was already back in his seat. Scrolling. Leia was clearing the table as if nothing had happened. The kids stared into their cereal bowls. Like they held answers to questions no one dared ask. I was not a mother there. Not a grandmother. Not even a person. Just a shadow taking up air. I closed the guest room door. Softly. Carefully. Then I locked it. Not because I feared them, but because I needed to feel I still controlled something. I sat on the edge of the bed. My fingers trembled. The blanket was half folded. The pillow still hid George's old handkerchief. I stared at the brown stains on my lap. Blooming like wounds. Slowly, mechanically, I changed into a fresh housecoat. The last one, not threadbare. Then I waited. No one came. No knock. No apology. Only silence. I touched the locket under my collar. The one George gave me when he finished building the porch. Inside his photo stared back. Black and white. Steady-eyed. Still strong. I closed my eyes. For a moment, he was in the yard again. Sweat on his brow. Hammer in hand. "This house will keep you safe," he'd said. "That's why I'm building it with my own 2 fists. Spring 1959. We had just moved in. Back when the land was open. Back when the birds sang louder. He painted the kitchen blue, said it matched my eyes. We danced in the living room before the floor was even sealed. I had flour on my sleeves. He had sawdust in his hair. That house held every version of us. Joy. Loss. Storms. Laughter. Even Laya's birth. George had driven like a madman to get us there. Held her with tears in his eyes. Softer than I'd ever seen him. The night he died, he made me promise. If they love you, they'll honor this house. If they don't, Mabel, don't sign a damn thing. And I hadn't. The papers Leia and Derek brought after the funeral I never signed. They didn't know that. They assumed I had. But the deed was still mine. Tucked away. Quiet. Like my voice. That morning after the coffee, after the silence, I remembered who I was. And who this house still belonged to. That evening, I came down late. My thigh still tender from the burn. The table was already set. My plate sat off to the side. A few scraps. No one asked if I wanted more. I buttered my bread slowly. Careful not to speak. The television murmured some forgettable show. The children whispered about school. Derek chewed with his eyes on his phone. No one asked how I felt. No one looked at me. I was back to being furniture. After dinner, as I rinsed my own plate, Laya stepped behind me. "Mom," she said softly. "Please don't take this morning to heart. Derek's been under a lot of stress." I turned off the water. Waited. She continued. "He's not a bad person. He snaps sometimes. But he doesn't mean it." I looked at her. Her eyes were on the floor. "He threw coffee at me, Leia," I said, calm as stone. "In front of your children." She bit her lip. "I know. I need you not to make this harder." Harder. Not crueler, not wrong. Just harder. Like I was a task on her to-do list she hoped would go away. That night I sat in bed with a notepad. The only thing in this house that still felt like mine. I began to write. Not out of anger. But out of need. Dates. Phrases. Moments. The 18th of January. You just eat and watch television. At least the dog fetches. The 5th of February. He threw my pillbox into a drawer. Said, "Keep your crap out of my kitchen." The 12th of March. Mocked my cardigan. "Are you hanging laundry in my dining room?" It became a ritual. Quiet. Invisible. I hid the notebook under my pillow. Each line felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. They tried to erase me with silence. But at night, I wrote myself back into existence. I watched Derek closely. The way he dropped his boots like the house owed him thanks. The way he raised his voice even when no one argued. Laya flinched more often now. Even at soft sounds. My daughter, once so bright, now moved like she was always bracing for something to fall. I wanted to ask, "Where did you go, my girl?" But I feared the answer was already everywhere. One night, as I passed the garage, I heard him on the phone. "She floats around like a ghost," he said. "Eats my food, thanks me like she's royalty, doesn't lift a damn finger." He laughed. Someone on the other end laughed back. I didn't cry. I just stood there. Then walked back to my room. Quietly. Like a ghost. But not for long. That night I did not write in the notebook. I stared at the ceiling instead. The shadows danced from the streetlight outside. The house creaked softly like it too was tired of pretending. His words echoed. I'd rather clean a dog kennel. And he meant it. Not as a joke. Not in passing. But with belief. The kind that stains deeper than a shout ever could. I remembered something George once told me: the worst insult he ever heard in the service was not loud but whispered. Because it meant they believed no one else cared. Derek believed that I was useless. That no one would care what he said. Least of all me. But I did care. Because I knew what I had been. I was not just a burden. I had once been the center. Thanksgiving dinners for 30 cooked in that very kitchen. Birthday cakes shaped like animals. From dresses sewn by hand when we could not afford store-bought. I held Olivia as a newborn in that living room. Sang lullabies with George by the fireplace. I was not invisible. Not always. They had erased me slowly, line by line, like chalk washed away by heavy rain. And I had let them. Until now. The next morning, before anyone stirred, I knelt before George's old desk. The drawer slid open with a soft groan. Inside, the folder still waited. Faded leather, creased edges. Familiar weight in my hands. Inside, the unsigned transfer. And the deed. Still in my name. I sat back, the papers in my lap, my breath steady. I traced the empty signature line with one finger. Power. Not in anger. Not in vengeance. But in memory. In promise. If I left this to them, it would be forgotten. If I acted now, it could become something else. I did not yet know what. Only that silence this time would not be surrender. That evening at dinner I ate quietly again. My plate was cold. My body sore. But inside I was no longer shrinking. I looked around the table, at Derek's phone, at Laya's tired eyes, at Olivia, biting her lip, at Ben swinging his feet. I folded my napkin. Set it down gently. And made a decision. They had no idea. But something had already begun to shift. Not in them. In me. The next day I moved slower on purpose. Let Derek see me pause at the top of the stairs. Let him sigh loudly behind me. Let him pretend that sigh was not a message. I sat in the living room after breakfast. Crocheted with hands that still remembered softness. The kids played nearby. Cartoons hummed in the background. I heard him behind me. Talking on the phone. Laughing. Yeah, she's still here, he said. The old bat's like wallpaper. You stop seeing her after a while. I didn't flinch. Just kept stitching. I was halfway through a shawl meant for no one. Not anymore. That evening I made chicken soup. The way George liked it. Simple, slow, full of care. No one touched it. Laya made pasta from a box. Derek added hot sauce to his plate and said nothing. After they cleared, I washed every dish. Stacked them neat. Wiped the counter dry. Ben walked in with his book. Grandma, he whispered, can you help me read this part? I smiled. Opened the page. Traced the words slowly with my finger. He said, I will go. I read and find the treasure. Ben smiled. That's the best part. I looked at him, small hands, big eyes. It is, I whispered. It truly is. That night in my room, I took out the map. George's old land map. Creased, faded. Still marked with his notes. North fence weak. Replace before next frost. Creek line clean, deer prints noted. 22 acres. Untouched. Still in my name. I remembered the flyer. Pinned to the board downtown. Green lettering. Let your land become legacy. I took it from my coat pocket. Smoothed it gently. The phone number waited at the bottom. I picked up the rotary handset. Dialed each number slowly. A bright voice answered. Tennessee Land and Conservation Trust. How can I help you? I cleared my throat. Yes, I saw your flyer. I might have land. I'm interested in making sure it becomes something good. A pause. Then warmth. Well, ma'am, we'd be honored. Would you like a quiet assessment? We're discreet. Yes, I said. Please. They scheduled the visit for Thursday afternoon. I thanked her, hung up, then sat there in the quiet for a long time. The house around me buzzed with a television show laughter. Derek's voice in the hallway. Olivia's footsteps overhead. But none of that reached me. In that moment, I was no longer waiting to be seen. I had become the one with a plan. Thursday arrived with clouds. The kind that hung low but never quite rained. I wore my old gardening gloves, a wide-brimmed hat, clothes I had not touched in years. At exactly 2:30, a beige SUV pulled up. Two people stepped out, a woman with a clipboard, a man carrying a camera. I met them by the back gate. You from the trust? I asked, my voice just a bit softer than usual. The woman smiled. Yes, ma'am. We're here for the evaluation. I nodded. The owners aren't home. I'm just the caretaker. I paused, then added. I've been tending to this land since the man who built it passed on. That was not a lie. We walked the property line. I showed them the creek where deer still came to drink. The patch of wildflowers that came back every spring, just like George said they would. They asked questions about soil, about zoning, about the tree health near the southern fence. I answered everything. 40 years on this land, there was nothing I did not know. Before they left, the woman looked at me. We'd be very interested. If you have authority, we'll send an offer. I do, I said. And yes. Please do. When the car pulled away, I remained by the gate a moment longer. Hands on the wood. Breath steady. It felt like telling a secret to someone who finally listened. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next day, the email arrived. The offer. It was more than fair. Enough to leave. Enough to start again. Enough to make sure this land never belonged to Derek. I printed the papers. Signed the intent to transfer. Slipped them into an envelope with quiet hands. Not shaking. Not rushed. Just ready. I placed it beside the deed. And sat back feeling something settle in my chest. That evening, they laughed in the living room. Laya curled under his arm. The children asleep upstairs. I stood behind my door watching from the narrow crack. Listened to the sitcom jokes. The sound of glass on glass. Then I closed it. And zipped my suitcase. Only a few things inside my locket, the notebook, George's photo, 2 scarves, a small jar of peppermint candies. Not everything. Just what mattered. Tomorrow I would leave this house. Not as a guest. Not as a freeloader. But as its last rightful keeper. And they would not see it coming. They had spent months pretending I wasn't there. But soon they would feel my absence, like the closing of a door they never knew was open. Not slammed. Not locked. Just quietly, finally shut. The morning was still dark when I slipped out the front door. The sky had just begun to lift its curtain of stars. A breeze stirred the trees, soft and certain. In my purse I carried everything: the deed, the signed transfer, my ID, and a letter from George folded neatly for strength. The house behind me made no sound. No footsteps, no laughter, no apology. Only the hum of the fridge and the creak of old wood. At 6:15 a yellow taxi rolled up just as I had scheduled. The driver, a young man, with music playing low, helped me with my small suitcase. Downtown, ma'am? He asked. Yes, I said. Courthouse first. Then just one more stop. We rode in silence. My fingers rested on the leather folder in my lap. I felt steady. Rooted. Almost tall. At the county clerk's office, I handed over the papers. The woman behind the desk scanned each page, smiled politely. Everything looks good, Miss Jennings. The funds from the trust have already been received. So quick. So final. So quiet. I asked for a copy for my records. She handed it over. Stamped. Signed. Real. You know, she added. It's rare. Most people don't think about preserving land like this. I smiled. That's the idea. From there I asked the driver to take me across town, to the other side of quiet. To Marjorie's house. I hadn't seen her in years. Not since George passed. She was a widow too, with wind chimes on her porch and a wit sharper than most knives. When I called last week, she didn't hesitate. Of course you can stay, she said. I've got a warm bed and fresh pie. Just bring your stories. She opened the door before I even knocked, wrapped me in a hug, like no time had passed. She didn't ask why I left. Didn't need to. Some women just know. That afternoon, I received confirmation. The transfer had gone through. The house and the land were now part of the Tennessee Reserve. Effective immediately. I sat on her porch, watched squirrels run across the fence, held my cup of sweet tea. No bitterness. No noise. Just the kind of stillness that follows a storm you finally step out of. For the first time in years, my silence felt like peace. And not disappearance. 2ng6, deepening conflict, ph, frime 2/3 500. To back at the house, my former house, things were not so calm. At exactly 10:07 in the morning, a sharp knock echoed through the hallway. Derek opened the door, still in his robe. A half-eaten slice of toast in one hand. 2 county officers stood there. Beside them, a representative from the Conservation Trust in a clean beige suit. Is this the residence of Derek and Leah Sanders? The officer asked. Derek blinked. Yeah. What is this about? We are here to inform you that the property you are occupying has been legally transferred. You are now considered tenants without contract or right of residence. You have 48 hours to vacate. Derek laughed. Loud, sharp, unsure. What the hell are you talking about? My wife owns this house. The trust representative handed over a folder. She does not. Never did. The property remained under Mabel Jennings' authority. She has executed a legal sale. Leah appeared behind him, barefoot hair, undone, eyes wide. She grabbed the folder, flipped pages fast. No. No, this has to be a mistake. This is our home. Our kids live here. The officer remained calm. Ma'am, if you believe your rights were violated, you may file a motion in court. But the transaction is legitimate. You must vacate the premises within 48 hours or face legal removal. Chaos erupted. Derek cursed. Leah cried. Olivia stood silently by the stairs, clutching Ben's hand. Across the street, a neighbor stepped out onto their porch, watching. Then came the moment I had prepared for. I walked down the gravel path toward the house. Navy coat. Steady steps. Legal folder in hand like a folded flag. The officer turned. Mrs. Jennings. I nodded. Leah saw me first. She ran forward, tears streaking her face. Mom, what did you do? Why would you do this? We needed you. The kids. This is their home. I looked at her for a long, quiet second, letting the silence say everything. Then I spoke. Calm. Clear. You said I took up space. Derek stormed toward me, fists clenched. You had no right. This was my home too. I turned to him. Taller than I had stood in years. Your home, I said. You hurled coffee at me. Laughed about me to your friends. You treated me like a stray dog. He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. You all said I didn't belong. That I was in the way. Well, I was never in the way. I was the foundation. And I held out the deed. Steady. I built this life. I built this house. And now I'm building something else. I paused. Let it fall into place like the last brick in a wall. I didn't take up space. I was the space. And now this space is no longer yours. I turned. Walked away, the wind gentle against my back. Like a hand guiding me forward. Behind me I heard nothing but disbelief. No footsteps followed. No words stopped me. The weight I had carried for so long lifted with every step. I returned to Marjorie's Saturday in the porch rocker with tea and the hum of wind chimes. Birdsong filtered through trees like threads of a lullaby. I had not just left a house. I had crossed a threshold. From tolerated to free. That evening, Marjorie made stew. We ate in silence, not awkward, but sacred. Later, she handed me a newspaper. Front page bottom corner. Local widow donates family land to Tennessee Reserve Project. There was a photo me in profile beside an old oak tree. No smile. Just stillness. And that was enough. She looked at me, eyes shining. They'll talk, she said. They already are. I nodded. They talked when I was invisible too. This time, I'll decide what they see. That night, I opened a fresh notebook. Not the old one filled with wounds. A new one. At the top of the page, I wrote 5 words. The Mabel Foundation begins here. Then I sat back, closed my eyes, and whispered into the quiet. George. I didn't sign it. I smiled. I didn't become a shadow. For the first time in years, I dreamed of something other than escape. I dreamed of legacy. Of rooms filled with stories. Of voices not silenced but heard. The next morning I woke with purpose. Walked into town a little straighter. Stopped at the courthouse to pick up the final confirmation. Then made one more visit the bank. Opened a simple account. Named it Make a Better Elder Life. Mabel. The clerk looked up. That's a lovely name. I smiled. Yes. Yes, it is. When silence is no longer survival, it can become a choice. Have you ever reclaimed your voice after years of being quiet? Share your turning point below. You never know who might need it. You are not alone. Grandma Radio is listening. Chew-ing 7. Turning point, PHUN, 1/3 502. By the following week, I had my first meeting with the local nonprofit coordinator. A young woman named Lacey, barely 30, with bright eyes and steady hands. She'd heard about the land transfer. Everyone's been talking about it, she said softly. But no one expected a foundation. I shrugged. They didn't expect me to still have a voice either. We sat together at a round table in the back of the public library. Between us notes, papers, a stack of ideas written on napkins and old receipts. I told her what I wanted. Not a charity. Not pity. A space. A network. For elders like me. The ones who had been whispered over moved aside, told they were lucky just to be remembered. I don't want to be remembered, I said. I want to be heard while I'm still here. Lacey smiled. Then let's begin. Within days, she helped me register the Mabel Foundation as a legal nonprofit. We opened a P.O. box. Set up a phone line. Printed our first flyer. We held our first tea circle in the basement of the Unitarian Church. I brought cornbread. Marjorie brought folding chairs. Darius, a college intern Lacey recruited, brought energy and a box of name tags that no one wore. I thought maybe 5 people would come. 30 showed up. They came slow, cautious, quiet. A man in a wheelchair whose daughter stopped visiting. A retired postmaster who missed being needed. A woman who whispered she had not spoken aloud in 2 weeks. I stood in the front with my locket around my neck and my hands slightly shaking. Then I told them the story. The burn on my thigh. The silence at dinner. The papers unsigned. The knock on the door. I told them about George. About the promise. About the house now under trees and trust. When I finished, no one clapped. But no one looked away. Then someone stood. A quiet man in a wool cap. He wiped his eye and said, "That's what they do, don't they? They erase us by pretending we were never loud." And one by one others began to speak. Stories spilled. Names remembered. Grief named. Dignity reclaimed. It was not loud. It was not easy. But it was real. And that's how the Mabel Foundation truly began. Not with a speech. But with a silence, finally broken. In the weeks that followed, the basement of that church became something sacred. We met every Thursday. Same time. Same circle. Same old chairs. We started bringing extra name tags. Eventually, folks wore them. Lacey helped us print a small booklet, Resources for Elder Housing Rights Inheritance Law, How to Recognize Quiet Coercion. Marjorie baked cookies. Darius designed a simple website that crashed on the first day from too many visitors. We didn't mind. The phones started ringing. Some were neighbors. Some were strangers. Some were whispers. Just asking, "Is it true?" I always answered the same. Yes. It is. One night, we got a call from a woman named Lorraine. She lived 2 towns over. Her daughter had taken her name off the joint account without telling her. Her house sold. Her clothes boxed. Her room now the storage closet. She cried while speaking. Said she had nowhere to go. I asked her one question. "Do you have your ID and a warm coat?" She did. "Then come to us," I said. She arrived 2 days later. A suitcase. A note folded in her palm. A single line scrawled across it. "They said I made everything harder." We found her a safe place with one of our volunteers. She sat in the next tea circle wrapped in a knitted shawl. She didn't speak. Not yet. But she smiled when we passed the cornbread. That was enough. That same week, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. But I knew the handwriting. It was from Laya. She said sorry. Said she had left Derek. Said the kids missed me. That she missed me too. The last line read, "I didn't know how quiet cruelty could be until it silenced me too." I folded the letter. Placed it in my drawer next to George's handkerchief and the first pamphlet we printed. I forgave her. But I didn't write back. Some doors do not need reopening to heal. That evening, the wind picked up. The chimes on the porch sang like laughter. Not mocking. Not forced. Just free. And for the first time I realized I had become what I needed all along. Not a mother in the background, but a voice in the room. By our 3rd month, the foundation had a rhythm. We called it Circles and Bridges. Circles for the tea meetings. Bridges for the outreach work. Darius created a slogan. "You're not too old to matter. You're just too valuable to be invisible." It made the front of every flyer after that. We began collecting stories, not for headlines, but for healing. Handwritten letters. Cracked photo albums. A voicemail from a woman in Missouri, who whispered, "They told me I was lucky they hadn't sent me to a home." We added a voice archive. Recorded readings sent to nursing facilities where residents rarely received visitors. One of our members, Martha, age 83, began leading a writing group. She called it Pages We Were Never Allowed to Write. By spring we had over 100 volunteers across 3 counties. But we didn't call them volunteers. We called them rememberers. Because that's what they did, they remembered people before the world forgot. One morning I sat at Marjorie's kitchen table with a cup of cold tea and the hum of early birds outside. I looked at our newest mail stack. 23 letters. 4 donations. 1 newspaper request for an interview. I thought of George. How he built that porch, not for show, but for shelter. And I realized this too was a porch. A place people came when the storm got too loud. I walked out to the yard. Stood beneath the oak tree Marjorie had planted years ago. Its branches curved like arms. I looked up and whispered, "Thank you for building the silence that let me hear myself again." And just then the wind moved through the leaves like an answer. Later that day, we hosted our first intergenerational gathering. Grandmothers, grandsons, widowed men, estranged daughters. They brought casseroles and old stories. One woman shared a recipe she had not cooked since her husband passed in 1987. We played music, nothing loud, just soft piano and the scratchy sound of a jazz record. For a moment, the room felt weightless. Not because the past was gone, but because it had finally been witnessed. That night, as we cleaned up, Darius turned to me. "Miss Mabel," he said, "you know this isn't just a foundation, right?" I looked at him, one eyebrow raised. "It's a home," he said. "For all the people who were told to sit quietly and wait for the end." I smiled. "No more waiting," I said. "Now, we begin." The first anniversary of the Mabel Foundation arrived on a Saturday morning, quiet and golden. We held the event outdoors in the very place where my old house once stood. Now it was a protected reserve. No fences. No walls. Just open land, tall grass, and the soft hum of bees moving through the wildflowers. People began arriving before we had finished setting up. Folding chairs in circles. A long table draped in a hand-sewn cloth. Name tags. Warm cider. A memory wall where guests could pin photos or write names of those they wanted to remember. I watched from the edge of the trees. Heart steady. Breath slow. Shoes still dusty from the walk-in. I wore George's locket. The one with his photo just after the war. His eyes serious. His jaw set like he knew something the rest of the world hadn't learned yet. As the last chairs were placed, Lacey stepped forward. She took the mic, nervous but clear. "Thank you all for coming," she began. 1 year ago, Miss Mabel Jennings did not just reclaim her voice. She created a home for others to find theirs too. The crowd applauded softly, then stepped aside, and I walked forward. Every step felt like a letter being delivered. I stood beneath a large oak tree, one that had survived storms and drought and decades of forgetting. At its base a small brass plaque had been installed. It read, "In honor of Mabel Jennings, she took up space and gave it back, a guardian of dignity." I placed my hand on it. It was cool. Solid. Real. Behind me, people stood in a wide arc. Some held candles. Some held each other. I looked up. Not at them, but at the sky. Then I spoke. "Thank you for not looking away." The wind stirred. And in that moment I did not feel brave or broken or burdened. I just felt here. Fully. A woman who once had coffee thrown at her and turned it into a gathering place for the unseen. Not with fire. Not with fury. But with silence that chose to speak. After the speeches, we invited people to share. One by one, they stepped forward. A man in his 70s wearing his late wife's scarf told us he hadn't spoken in public since her funeral. A teenager read a poem written by her grandmother before Alzheimer's took her voice. A woman with silver braids held up a casserole dish and said, "This is the recipe my mother passed down, but no one in my family ever asked for it. So, I brought it here, for someone who will taste it and remember." They lined up at the memory wall. Pinning names. Photos. A pocket watch. A pressed flower. No one spoke loudly. But no one whispered either. Even the wind seemed to pause to listen. As the sun began to lower, we served tea and small sandwiches. Darius handed me a framed photo. It was me standing on the porch of Marjorie's house, arms crossed, a half-smile on my lips. Beneath it, a caption in simple type. She didn't take back her house. She built a new one in every room we enter. I stared at it for a long while. Then I nodded. It's not mine alone. Put it by the table. It did. At dusk, a local musician played an old hymn on acoustic guitar. Soft. Tender. Like lullabies for lives not yet finished. And when the last chord faded, I stood once more. No microphone. No stage. Just my voice. I used to believe I said that after a certain age you should shrink. Take up less space. Apologize for your bones and your voice and your memories. But now I know some things are worth standing tall for. Like truth. Like silence that heals. Like legacy that doesn't ask permission. And today you're all a part of it. The crowd didn't cheer. They stood. Many cried. And in that stillness I saw what George must have seen when he built that porch with calloused hands and dreams he never said out loud. A place where someone could sit and feel like they mattered. No permission needed. As twilight deepened, people began to leave in twos and threes. Slowly, unhurried. No one rushed. No one looked at their phones. They lingered to say thank you, to hug, to press old recipes into waiting hands. Before the last guest left, a woman approached me. Her eyes were tired but kind. She said, "My daughter said I talk too much about the past. But here, everyone listens." I nodded, and for a moment we just stood together. Two women. Two stories. No need to explain. After everyone had gone, I walked the land alone. Shoes soft on grass that had once held the weight of my rocking chair. I stood where the kitchen used to be, right where Derek once threw the coffee. Now only clover grew there. And peace. I bent down, pressed a hand to the soil. "It's yours now," I whispered. "To remember. Not to burn." Then I turned back toward the oak tree. Marjorie was waiting there. In one hand, a thermos. In the other, 2 paper cups. "I thought you might want one last cup," she said. I laughed. "Only if it's not scalding." We sat side by side under the branches. The stars began appearing one by one, soft and steady. Marjorie sipped, then looked over. "Do you regret it?" "No," I said. "I regret waiting so long to remember I was allowed to choose." She nodded. We sat in silence. The kind that feels like a blanket and not a wall. Before we left, she reached into her coat and handed me a slip of paper. "A quote for your next flyer," she said. It read. She threw silence, and it landed like a stone on still water. And it echoed truth. I folded it carefully, placed it in my locket. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered to the dark, "I am not what they said I was." And sleep came easy. Not because the story was over, but because it was mine now. Every word. Every silence. Mine. Months passed. The land grew wilder, greener. Birdsong replaced the morning news. And I woke each day, not wondering who I was, but remembering. I rented a small house just beyond town, white shutters, peeling paint, a garden already stubborn with basil and mint. It did not have history, but it had light. And no footsteps overhead. I brought only what mattered: the locket, George's handkerchief, my notebook, and the letter from Laya. I placed them in a drawer beside a jar of peppermint candies. Some habits should not be unlearned. My porch wasn't wide, but it faced east. Every morning I sat with tea and let the sun find my face. Neighbors waved. Some brought pie. None asked why I had left or what had happened. And that was the kindness I never thought to want. The Mabel Foundation grew without fanfare. Just slow, sure roots. We opened a second circle in another county. Lacey trained new volunteers. Darius built a small database for elder support networks. Marjorie hosted a storytelling series from her porch. And me. I listened. I wrote. Sometimes I cried when someone said I thought I was the only one. But mostly I smiled. Because I knew what silence had once cost me. And now I knew what it could build. One afternoon a letter came. Typed. Neat. From the county. The official designation for the land was complete. It now belonged in perpetuity to the Tennessee Conservation Trust. A reserve. Untouchable. My name would be listed on a small metal sign near the entrance trail. Mabel Jennings. Her silence protected what her voice reclaimed. I held the paper for a long time. Then I poured a cup of tea, walked to the garden, and sat beneath the soft rustle of the wind. I did not feel triumphant. I felt settled. Like the weight was now memory, not burden. That night I visited George's grave. It was the first time in months. I brought flowers from the new garden, nothing store-bought. I brushed the stone gently with my sleeve, then whispered. They called me a burden. You always knew better. I didn't sign it, George. But I signed something better. And for a moment I swear the wind smelled like cedar. Just like the porch you built all those years ago. Weeks later, we held a small gathering at the edge of the reserve. No speeches, no programs. Just folding chairs, quiet conversation, and a basket of lemon bars Marjorie insisted on baking. People came with blankets. A few brought guitars. Someone played an old hymn I hadn't heard since 1965. We lit lanterns as dusk fell. Hung them on low branches. Their glow made the trees look like they were remembering something. I sat by the old creek bed, a place George once cleared with his bare hands. It still ran clean, still whispered. A little girl Olivia's age came and sat beside me. She didn't speak. Just offered me a dandelion. Thank you, I said. She smiled like she understood what wasn't being said. Later that night I returned home alone. I made tea, lit a single lamp, and opened the drawer where I kept my notebook. On the first page I wrote, I am not the coffee. I am the silence after it spilled. And the voice that rose from that hush. Then I closed it, placed it back in the drawer, tucked the locket beside it, and looked around the room I now called mine. There was no noise. No anger behind a door. No egg slammed on a plate. Only the sound of the trees outside brushing against the windows like fingers tapping gently to say, You are safe here. I turned off the lamp. Let the dark settle like an old friend finally welcomed in. And I knew not everyone would understand why I chose to walk away quietly. But those who did, they would hear something in the silence. Something clear. And strong. And entirely mine. The late sunlight touches the wood grain of the old table, and for a moment, everything feels soft again. I've learned that legacy isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a name remembered in silence. And a pie shared with grace. What quiet legacy do you hope to leave behind? We'd love to read your story in the comments below. You are not alone. Your journey matters. Subscribe to Grandma Radio, where every story is a second chance.